The wind howled across the open plains, sharp as a knife's edge and dry as the bones it swept over. Dust spiraled into the sky, catching the last light of day in a cloud that stung the eyes and choked the throat. Jedediah Callahan stood motionless over a freshly turned patch of earth, the handle of a crude wooden cross gripped in his calloused hands. He pressed it into the dirt until it stood straight, though it wobbled like a drunk after Sunday service. No flowers, no words. Just dirt, wind, and the last trace of warmth sinking into the horizon. It had been a dry day to bury a wet coffin. He hadn't cried. Not because he didn't want to, because there was simply nothing left in him to weep. Eliza had been the last good thing in a life that had dried up faster than spring creeks in August. Her laugh, bright and foolish, her eyes, wide with belief in things like new beginnings and fertile land. They had come west with too little and hoped too much. Jed looked down at the grave, one booted toe tapping gently against the wooden cross as if testing its truth. "Ain't much," he muttered, "but it'll hold." His voice sounded like sand rubbed against leather, used and stiff. He turned back toward the wagon, where the mules waited with the indifference of animals used to loss. The house in the distance, more a suggestion of shelter than a true home, leaned into the prairie wind like it had grown tired of resisting. One wall was still missing a shutter, the roof sagged, but it was all he had. And with Eliza gone, it echoed louder than any church bell. Lone Briar was 15 miles by wheel, 10 by horse if you rode reckless. He chose the latter. The town was a spit of buildings stitched together by desperation, a saloon, a blacksmith, a single-room church, and the depot where the railroad sighed and screeched its way across the prairie like a wounded beast. Jed's arrival earned glances, nods, and a few murmurs behind dusty palms. His funeral suit, a dark wool relic from back east, hung awkwardly on a frame worn thin by grief and hard winters. He tied his horse at the rail outside the saloon, then wandered toward the station without purpose, guided only by the ache of needing to be anywhere but home. At the depot, steam curled from the iron beast that had just hissed to a stop. A handful of passengers stepped off, each carrying bundles of hope or regret. Jed barely noticed them until one woman remained, standing alone beneath the station's awning. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a green dress that might have once been fashionable before the war. Her hat was pinned tight to her head, though the prairie wind tugged mercilessly at its brim. Her expression was unreadable, not shocked, not sad, just braced, like someone waiting for a punch that never came. The station master leaned in close to a man nearby and whispered too loudly, "That's the one. Poor soul. Come all the way from Ohio. Mail-order bride," but the fella took one look and rode off. Said she looked too old for the trouble. The man laughed, spitting into the dust. "Don't blame him. She looks like she bites." Jed's jaw tightened. He wasn't one for heroics or chivalry, hadn't believed in much of anything since Eliza's cough turned wet and her eyes glazed like frost. But something about the woman's stillness struck him. Not defeat, not shame, just a kind of hard-won endurance that he recognized in the mirror every morning. She turned and caught him looking. Instead of flinching, she raised an eyebrow like she was taking his measure. Her lips quirked into a near smile, not warm, not cold, just real. He stepped forward before he'd thought it through. "You hungry?" She blinked once. "I beg your pardon." He nodded toward the saloon. "Cook there's decent, if you don't mind grease and sass." "Name's Jedediah Callahan." "Martha Jane Dunley," she said, straightening slightly. don't usually take supper with strangers. Well, he said, adjusting his hat, I don't usually bury my wife before breakfast. So we're both having a peculiar day. She considered him for a long, silent moment. Her eyes, a sharp hazel green, held the same kind of wear as his, scratched glass that still caught the light. Then, with a barely visible nod, she stepped down from the platform. Inside the saloon, conversation stilled for half a heartbeat as they walked in together. Then it resumed, buzzing, whispering, filling the corners. Jed ignored it. Martha Jane sat across from him at a wobbly table, lifting her chin as if daring the room to speak louder. You from here? She asked, tearing off a piece of cornbread. Not by choice, he said. Bought land, sheep. Thought I could turn it around. And your wife? Eliza, he said, the name cracking slightly as it left him. She believed in the dream more than I did. Martha didn't offer condolences. She just nodded. Belief will kill you faster than a bullet out here. He let that hang between them. You were really left? He asked, voice low. Man took one look and decided I wasn't worth the ride home, she said, sipping weak coffee. Too old, too plain, too much of something, not enough of something else. Jed stared into his cup. Folks out here forget what real looks like. She smiled then, not wide, not soft, but the kind of smile you earn by surviving things that try to break you. After supper, they stepped into the evening. The sun had bled out behind the hills, leaving the world bathed in a purple hush. He hesitated. You got a place to stay? No. He nodded, then looked toward the road that led home. I got space. Ain't fancy, but the roof mostly holds. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. You offering charity? No, he said. Company. Martha looked toward the darkening horizon. You plan to keep talking in one-word riddles? Only when I don't know what the hell I'm doing, he replied. She laughed once, sharp and short. Then I suppose we're both lost. He started toward his horse. She followed, her boots crunching the dry earth behind him. By the time they reached the edge of town, the silence between them felt less like a void and more like an agreement. Neither had expected their lives to twist into this shape, but here they were, dust-covered, broken-edged, and still standing. As they rode into the night, Lone Briar vanished behind them, swallowed by the same wind that had watched a burial that morning. Ahead, the moon rose slow and full, casting silver light on the prairie. Jed didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew this. The house would be a little less empty now. And sometimes, that was enough to keep riding forward. Martha stood in the doorway of Jed's house, the light behind her stretching long shadows across the warped floorboards. She set her carpet bag down slowly, surveying the place like a general sizing up a battlefield. The house creaked with age and disuse, its walls stained with prairie dust and sorrow. A single chair, a cold hearth, and a table missing one leg made up the bulk of the furnishings. Yet she didn't look surprised, just tired. Tired in the way only people with nowhere else to go get tired. Jed poured her a cup of coffee from the kettle he'd stoked back to life. It tasted like burnt water and regret, but she drank it without complaint. He stood across from her, arms crossed, chewing over the thing that had been clawing its way out of his chest since they'd left town. When he finally spoke, it came out rough and plain. I don't reckon you got plans. Martha glanced up. Not ones that stuck. I got land. A house. Animals that need feed in, chores that don't stop, 'cause I'm missing a wife. She raised an eyebrow. That your way of proposing, Mr. Callahan? I ain't proposing, he said. I'm statin' facts. You need shelter. I need help. Don't have the time or inclination to court proper, and I expect you ain't got much patience for nonsense. She finished her coffee in one swallow and set the tin mug down with a soft clink. Her gaze didn't waver. I don't cook unless I feel like it. I don't clean for gratitude. And I sure as hell don't take orders from a man who can't keep his damn roof from leaking. Jed nodded once. Fair. But I can patch a roof. She studied him a moment longer, then gave a quiet nod. I've been offered worse. They married the next morning. No ceremony, no guests, just Jed, Martha, and the town's reluctant justice, who barely looked up from his paperwork as they exchanged vows and 3 dry sentences. The ink on the ledger hadn't dried before the whispers started. A widower and a spinster, a funeral and a wedding inside a week. Folks in Lone Briar always found something to talk about when their own lives got too quiet. Back on the ranch, the arrangement began as nothing more than proximity. Martha took the spare room, Jed kept to his own. They moved around each other like skittish animals, careful not to disturb whatever fragile balance they'd struck. He showed her where the feed was kept, how the pump had to be primed just right or it would cough out nothing but air. She didn't ask about Eliza, and he didn't bring it up. They worked in tandem. Jed mended fence posts while Martha patched shirts and wrangled chickens that had gone half wild from months of neglect. She had a way with animals, steady hands, low voice. The horses took to her fast, and even the barn cat, a scarred old Mauser named Whiskey, curled around her ankles by the 3rd day. At first, their conversations were functional. Storm comin', he'd say. I know. My knees told me. Watch the 3rd step on the porch, it splinters. I stepped through it yesterday. I'm aware. But something in their rhythm shifted as days passed. One night, she roasted a rabbit and set 2 plates on the table. He looked at the 2nd plate, then at her. I didn't ask. She shrugged. Didn't ask if I could stay either. He said nothing, but he didn't forget it. Another day, she found him standing over Eliza's grave, boots half sunk in the drying earth. He didn't move when she approached. She used to braid wildflowers into my sleeves, he said. Said it softened me up. Martha crossed her arms. I don't do flowers. I know. A beat, then her voice softened just barely. She must have loved you to pieces. He didn't reply, just turned and walked back to the house with shoulders a little straighter, like carrying the memory had gotten lighter. The piece of the arrangement was thin, fragile. And it didn't last. Clayton Rourke came riding in just past noon one blistering day, a cigar clamped between his teeth and 2 men flanking him like vultures with badges. His horse kicked up clouds as he dismounted in front of the house without so much as a wave. Jed stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, though he didn't aim it. Rourke grinned like a man used to getting what he wanted. Callahan, he drawled. I'm here about that bit of land you're squatting on. I own it, see? That's the thing. Turns out the previous owner, man by the name of McGreevy, never finished paying the bank. And since I now own the bank, guess who's in debt to me? Jed tightened his grip on the rifle. That's a lie. Sure. But it's a legal one. Martha appeared beside him then, quiet but firm. What's your price? Rourke tipped his hat. Smart woman. $1,500 or the deed. Your call. Jed didn't look at her. Ain't got 1,500. Ain't giving up the land. Rourke's smile widened. Then I reckon we'll be back in a week to collect. They rode off in a storm of hooves and mock salutes. Martha and Jed stood in silence until the dust settled. Inside, Jed threw the rifle on the table, hard enough to rattle the boards. I ain't losing that land, he muttered. Martha leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Then you'd better start figuring how to defend it. He looked at her, really looked, as if trying to see the outline of a partner in someone he barely knew. You didn't sign up for this. She scoffed. I didn't sign up for anything. That's the point. But here we are. They argued that night, not loudly, not cruelly, but with a kind of rawness that didn't leave room for civility. Jed, too used to silence, barked his grief like a wounded dog. Martha, too used to being dismissed, bit back twice as hard. You don't get to throw your dead wife at me every time something gets hard. You ain't her. No, she snapped. I'm the one still standing here. He didn't speak after that, just poured himself a drink, downed it, and walked out the door. The night swallowed him whole. Martha stood in the doorway for a long while, then returned to her room without saying another word. Outside, the prairie wind howled again. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. He didn't come back until long after midnight, and she wasn't waiting. The next morning, he found her sitting on the porch, cup of coffee in one hand, the other resting lightly on the rifle across her lap. Coffee's cold, she said. Yeah, he replied. It's better that way. She nodded toward the road. They'll come back. I know. You ready to fight for it? He looked at her, hair still tousled, eyes ringed with exhaustion, face weathered and unbending. And for the first time, he felt something in her presence that wasn't obligation or convenience. It was an anchor. Gravity. I wasn't yesterday, he said. But I reckon I am now. She reached down and opened the rifle's chamber, checked the shells, then snapped it shut. Well, she said, let's see if the damn roof can hold up to bullets. Their eyes met, not warm, not yet forgiving, but locked in a shared decision. A practical arrangement, maybe, but sometimes the most practical things are the ones you end up fighting hardest to keep. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the dust was already beginning to rise. The morning they came, the wind was dead still. Jed woke before first light, the sky an ink-black sheet stretched over the world. He dressed in silence, the weight of the coming day pressing against his chest like a stone too big to carry but too important to drop. Martha was already outside, splitting kindling with clean, efficient strikes. She didn't look up when he stepped out, but he knew she'd heard him. Neither of them said a word. There was nothing left to say. They had spent the week preparing, reinforced the barn, dug a trench near the back fence, stashed rifles and ammo in hidden corners of the house. Martha had even strung up a bell line across the north pasture to catch movement. Every day since Rourke's visit had been soaked in sweat and urgency. Survival had a way of sharpening focus. Jed leaned against the porch post, watching her for a long moment. You sure you want to stay? Her axe came down with a thud. She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, then turned to him. You keep a skin, like I haven't already stayed. He gave a slow nod, jaw tightening. He hated what he felt then, not fear, not even anger, but the hollow ache of someone preparing to lose something again. That was the cruelest part. You start thinking maybe you don't deserve anything good, and then something good walks into your life anyway, and you're left praying it survives the fallout. By noon, the dust plume showed on the horizon, a long, curling snake of earth and tension. Rourke was punctual. Jed counted 6 riders. 2 he recognized, one with a patch over his left eye, the other with a laugh like a whetstone. The rest were unknowns, but they all rode like men with blood on their boots. Martha watched them from the barn loft, rifle balanced on the window frame, breath steady. Jed stood behind the broken fence, his shotgun cradled in both arms. He didn't wave, didn't speak. Just waited. Rourke rode to the front, reining his horse just short of the property line. He grinned, white teeth flashing in a face too smooth for this land. You had a week, Callahan. Jed didn't move. I remember. You got my money? No. Rourke's grin widened. Then I'll take the deed. No, Jed said again, this time lower. Rourke nodded toward the house. Woman still in there? Or did she come to her senses and run? She's got better aim than me, Jed said. So I reckon you should hope she did. The moment hung like a blade. The men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting near holsters. No birdsong, no breeze. Just stillness. Then Rourke's hand twitched. A gun barked from the loft. One of the riders pitched sideways, a scream tearing from his throat as he hit the dirt. The others scattered for cover, weapons out, shouting, cursing. Dust exploded in clouds, and the world turned into chaos. Jed dropped behind the fence and fired. The shotgun's roar echoed across the prairie, knocking one of Rourke's men back like a rag doll. Bullets chewed through wood and earth. Martha reloaded, moved positions, fired again. The ranch groaned under the weight of violence. A blast shattered a window. The chicken coop exploded into feathers. Jed's shoulder burned from a grazing shot, but he kept firing, kept moving, using every inch of cover he could find. He wasn't shooting to scare. He was shooting to stop. A rider broke toward the house. Martha caught him clean through the chest before he made it 10 feet past the porch. He tumbled off his horse, hitting the ground hard and staying there. Jed saw her then, framed in the loft window, face tight with focus, hair wild in the wind. She was terrifying and beautiful. Rourke took cover behind a low ridge, screaming orders. His face was no longer smiling. He was bleeding from his left shoulder, rage written across every line of his expression. Burn it, he shouted. Torch the damn place. One of the men lit a bottle, flame licking up the rag stuffed in its neck. Jed fired before he could throw it, catching him in the gut. The bottle fell, burst harmlessly on a rock. Another man circled wide, trying to flank. Martha disappeared from the loft and emerged seconds later on the porch, rifle raised. The man hesitated. That was all she needed. One shot. He dropped. It felt like hours, but the firefight lasted minutes. When the last shot rang out, the ranch was a ruin of smoke, hoofprints, and blood. Rourke was gone. He'd vanished into the dust during the last exchange, crawling, running, hell-bent on survival. Jed wanted to chase him, wanted to finish it, but his legs refused. His body shook from adrenaline and loss. The ground swayed beneath him like a ship at sea. Martha walked up beside him, face flushed, shirt soaked through with sweat and gunpowder. She didn't ask if he was hurt. She could see he was. "I'll get the whiskey," she said. He reached out, grabbed her hand. She froze. "I thought I was ready," he said, voice raw. She looked at him, not with pity, not with softness, but with that same hard steadiness that had been there from the start. "No one's ever ready," she replied. "You just fight anyway." They sat on the porch steps as the sun dipped low. Smoke curled from a barn wall. 2 chickens strutted through the wreckage like nothing had happened. The wind returned at last, stirring the dust that had soaked in blood. They buried the bodies behind the pasture, under unmarked stones. Neither of them spoke during the digging. There was a reverence in silence. When the last shovel of dirt was packed down, Martha leaned on the handle. "They'll come back," she said. "If not Rourke, someone else. Land this stubborn always draws trouble." Jed nodded. "Then we don't stop fighting." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since the shooting stopped. "You ready for that?" "Every day." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushed a lock of hair from her face, and let his hand linger just a second too long. "I think I'd rather fight with you than be left standing alone again." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "That's the smartest thing you've said since I met you." The prairie wind picked up, colder now, brushing the scars of the battle like a whispered warning. Night would fall soon. The stars would come out, indifferent as always. But for now, the two of them stood in the fading light, surrounded by blood and dust and something new neither of them wanted to name just yet. Not love, not yet, but something that might live long enough to become it. The first frost came early. By the time October settled over Lone Briar, the days shrank, the sky turned to hammered steel, and the wind carried whispers through the bare trees. Martha rose before dawn every morning, the hem of her dress stiff with frost as she poured boiling water over stiff leather boots to make them pliable. Jed limped now, a reminder of the bullet that had grazed his thigh during the shootout, but he still made the rounds, rifle slung low, eyes scanning the horizon like the war hadn't ended. Because it hadn't. Rourke had vanished, but his absence wasn't peace, it was tension stretched thin. Martha could feel it in the hush of the animals, the way Whiskey the barn cat wouldn't stray far from the porch, the way Jed slept with the shotgun across his lap and never quite closed both eyes at once. Their days were quieter, their nights louder with the silence of waiting. Still, they worked together in a rhythm, like roots finally growing into the same soil. One evening, after the first snow dusted the earth like powdered bone, Jed came in with a letter clutched in his dirt-caked hand. No stamp, no return mark, just his name scrolled in ugly, familiar ink. He dropped it on the table. "It's from him." Martha didn't flinch, just stared at the envelope like it might bite. "He's calling me out," Jed said, voice low. "Says he wants to finish it. Just him and me. In town. 2 nights from now." She picked up the letter and read it. Once, twice. There was no threat in it, just finality. A time, a place, and a signature that stank of blood and pride. "I thought men like him didn't believe in fair fights." "He doesn't," Jed said. "But he believes in making a show of it." "You go," she said, you won't come back. He sat down, slow and heavy. Maybe that's the point. Martha slammed the letter down. You think that's what Eliza would have wanted? For you to die just to prove something? This ain't about Eliza. Isn't it? She shot back. You're trying to trade your guilt for glory. I see it, Jed. I feel it every time you pull away from me like you ain't worth saving. He looked away, ashamed. She stepped closer, eyes burning. You think fighting him will fix something? It won't. It won't bring her back. It won't make this land safer. And it sure as hell won't give me a reason to stay. His eyes snapped to hers. I've buried too many people already, she whispered. Don't ask me to bury one more. Jed didn't sleep that night. He sat outside on the steps, the cold settling into his bones. And when morning came, he didn't tell her he'd made up his mind. He just saddled the horse. Lone Briar looked like a ghost town by the time he rode in. Doors were shuttered, windows dark. Word had spread. Rourke had picked the middle of the main street. He was already there, lounging against a barrel like he didn't have a care in the world. Two of his men watched from a rooftop, rifles in hand. So much for fair. Jed dismounted, rifle in one hand, eyes steady. You showed, Rourke said, grinning. Didn't think you had the spine. You're talking to a man with nothing left to lose, Jed replied. Is that so? Rourke stepped forward. I heard you picked up a woman, meanwhile. Too old for most men, too smart for any. Jed didn't rise to the bait. Let's get this done. Rourke took off his coat, letting it fall to the dust. He wore 2 pistols. No rules, he said. No turns. Just quick hands and a fast end. Jed nodded. The street went still. The first shot came from the rooftop, but it didn't hit Jed. It hit the rifleman on the opposite roof. Rourke spun, confused, just in time for Martha to step out of the sheriff's office, lever-action rifle at her shoulder. She'd circled through the back alleys, taking the high ground first. She fired again. Another rooftop gunman down. Jed moved then, fast and sure. His rifle roared, and Rourke dove behind a trough, cursing, firing wildly. Bullets ripped through wooden posts and shattered windows. The whole street screamed with gunfire. Martha kicked open a side door and moved like she was born to it. Each shot was deliberate, calculated. She wasn't protecting Jed, she was fighting beside him. Rourke lunged out, one pistol blazing. A round grazed Jed's shoulder, spun him sideways. Blood bloomed across his coat. He dropped to one knee, teeth gritted, and pulled the trigger. Rourke stumbled back, hit once in the thigh. He screamed and tried to crawl toward his fallen gun. Jed rose, limping toward him, barrel raised. But Martha was faster. She reached Rourke first, kicked the pistol away, and stood over him, breath ragged, hair matted to her forehead. You should have stayed gone, she said. Rourke spat blood, sneering up at her. This land ain't worth dying for. She knelt beside him, calm and cold. It's not the land, she whispered. It's the people on it. Then she rose, turned her back, and let Jed make the choice. Jed stood there a long moment, breathing heavy, blood dripping down his arm. Rourke groaned, rolling onto his back. The rifle cracked once more. Jed lowered the barrel. Rourke was still, and Lone Briar was quiet again. The townsfolk emerged slowly, cautious as deer after a storm. No one spoke, but they watched as Jed and Martha walked side by side to the horse. He leaned on her now. She didn't mind. They left the street behind without fanfare, without thanks. Back at the ranch, the air was still cold, but different. Lighter. Martha helped him inside, bandaged his shoulder, and poured 2 whiskeys. "You killed him," she said, handing him a glass. "I had to." "No," she said. "You chose to." He sipped, winced, and nodded. "You still think you've got nothing left to lose?" Jed looked at her then, really looked, saw the lines on her face that time hadn't been kind to, the scars, the stubbornness, the way she stood like a storm refusing to pass. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I've got everything to lose." She blinked once, then raised her glass. "To surviving." He raised his. "To staying." They drank. Later, he found her outside, looking at the moon. He stepped beside her, silent for a long time. "You stayin'?" he asked. "I've been here since you buried your grief," she said. "You just didn't see me." He reached for her hand. This time, she let him take it. The wind shifted again, warmer now. Lone Briar wouldn't ever be easy. Trouble would come again. Dust would rise. Blood might spill. But they would stand together, and this time, neither of them would walk away.